Brand new Quinnipiac poll shows neurosurgeon Ben Carson in a statistical tie with Donald Trump for the Republican presidential nomination. Joining us right now, another contender, Republican Senator and GOP presidential candidate Rand Paul, who sits in the top 10 of that poll. Senator, good to have you on the program. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning, Maria. Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about your economic plan, your fair and flat tax, as you call it. How do you see that creating jobs?
Well, I think the main thing to understand is that jobs are created in the private sector. Government doesn't create any jobs. Government is, like Thomas Paine said, a necessary evil, but it's not something that necessarily creates jobs. So what you have to do is leave more money in the private sector. And so that's what I've been saying all along. We need a tax cut. I don't want the tax plan to be revenue neutral. I want there actually to be more money left in the private sector and less money in the hands of government. And I want a smaller government and a bigger private sector.
But, of course, the question becomes, where does the revenue come from then in terms of the debt and deficits in this country? You want to move to a 14.5% tax rate on all types of incomes with a sizable deduction and exemption and eliminate the corporate tax to create this 14.5% business transfer tax. How do you make up the difference?
You have to cut spending, and all along I've said I do want a smaller government. I want to stimulate the economy by leaving more money in it, but I don't want more deficits, and I'm pretty much a deficit hawk. I've introduced 3 different 5-year plans to balance over 5 years, and interestingly, you can actually balance the budget by cutting 1% across the board each year for about 4 or 5 years. So I don't think it's really as difficult as some people say it is, but I would eliminate entire departments. The Department of Commerce, to me, is just corporate welfare. You could eliminate it tomorrow. You wouldn't even know it was gone. Most of the Department of Education should be taken care of at the state level, not the federal level. Department of Energy, most of that is wasteful regulations and overhead and abusive bureaucracy. So there's a lot of government downsizing I would do. At the same time, I also would make the tax code much simpler, where you do your tax return on one individual postcard. And
we should point out that the Tax Foundation actually says that over the long term, they believe your plan would grow the economy by 12.9% in the long run. Let me get your take on why we are where we are. You know, we just got the ADP numbers out. 182,000 jobs created for the month of October. Sure, it was better than expected, but we're still sort of stuck in the mud in this economy. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Why?
Well, we still have a large part of the population that's become non-working. And so the unemployment figures only measure those who are still looking for work, but a lot who have given up on work. And I think what we really need is a sustained sort of effort to say that jobs are good and that everybody should have one. And I think work ought to be associated with everything. So, for example, I think everyone who receives anything from government should work, not really as punishment, but actually as a reward, because I think there's something rewarding about every day getting up and doing something. And I think it can be productive, from making things with your hands to doing surgery to working in a bank. Every job has some reward to it, and I think we've gotten away from that. And I think we really need to instill in the population something that is so great about work. And I think it could be associated with every welfare program we have, not just a little bit, but every welfare program ought to have work involved.
I understand that, but what I asked you is, why are we in such a slow economy? To what do you attribute this economy?
Well, a lot of the money that's been created is sort of this false illusion of money created by the Federal Reserve, and it's actually mostly tied up in banks. Because we now pay banks to keep their deposits, a lot of the quantitative easing has grown and grown, and the banks have grown, but it hasn't really filtered out to the rest of America. So really what you need is a smaller government, bigger marketplace. And so I don't think we've done any of that. What we've done is gotten a bigger debt. We borrow $1 million a minute, and some economists argue that this burden of debt is costing us about 1 million jobs a year. So I think the burden of large government, excessive regulations, and really a tax code that chases American jobs overseas. I mean, we now have a name for companies leaving: inversion. Companies are leaving because our tax code's so bad.
And we're about to lose Pfizer, the 10th largest company in America, because it's going to acquire an Ireland-based company so that it can take its tax rates down. What are you going to do about the Federal Reserve, Senator? You know, we've been debating the implications of this easy money. The Fed can't even raise, they don't see an opportunity to raise interest rates off of zero, even now, by 1/4 of a point. What are the implications of this?
I think in general terms, we should get the Federal Reserve out of the business of setting interest rates.
What does that mean?
Interest rates.
What do you mean? What are you going to do?
Well, I wouldn't have them setting the daily discount window. I wouldn't have them sort of taking the lead on fixing interest rates throughout the marketplace. Interest rates are basically the price of money, and we shouldn't have price controls. Price controls don't work for bread. They don't work for soap. They don't work for water or food. We also shouldn't have price controls on the rate of interest. Interest is the most universal signal that goes throughout the marketplace. It gives people feedback on whether they should expand their business or contract their business. When you don't have true market interest rates, what you end up having is a distortion of the marketplace where people overinvest and you end up developing a bubble or a false boom, and then you get a correction. That's what happened in the real estate, boom and bust. But we're probably headed for another boom and bust cycle where we have a lot of money that's been created. Much of it has gone into the stock market, and many of us feel that there is a boom in the stock market that there's going to be a correction for, but we all relate it back to the fact that the Federal Reserve is basically fixing the interest rates. I would leave them open to the market, and the market would determine interest rates.
You have a lot of plans and obviously some good ideas in terms of getting the economy back on track, but let's face it, you are at the bottom of the list in terms of resonating with the American people. Can you bring this back?
Well, I think it's debatable. We had elections in Kentucky yesterday, and they said the Democrat was up 5 points one day before the election. Well, the Republican won by 8, so they were off by 13 points. I think we need to quit putting so much credence in polls and look at how hard people are working, whether they have an organization on the ground, and ultimately let the elections decide it. If we're going to exclude people based on polls that aren't accurate, I think it's a big mistake. I don't believe that Donald Trump or Ben Carson will be our nominee. So that means the polls are going to change by 20 points in the next 2 months. And it's happened many times in our past. The polls continue to get it wrong, and yet we're basing whether or not we're going to allow people to run based on polls that aren't working very well for us.
I think you make a great point. Yeah, and I want to ask you about the Kentucky race, because I'm glad you brought it up. The governor there coming in from the Tea Party. And do you think this is saying something about the general election, or is this just a Kentucky story?
Well, I think it's saying something about the Democrats in Kentucky. President Obama has decimated the party. We're hurting. Our economy is hurting. We've lost thousands of jobs in the coal industry. They have devastated really one of the largest industries in our state, and we blame President Obama, and I think rightly so. And so he's cast a pall over all Democrats in our state, and it's going to be very difficult for them to win. Even when they try to run away from the president, they can't get far enough away from this president. So he's destroyed the Democrat Party in Kentucky. It will be to the benefit of Republicans. Also, we had a good candidate. Matt Bevin's a great candidate, a conservative, a businessman, and an outsider. And I think this is the year of people wanting non-politicians. And so I think it was a good year for us, and I'm happy that Matt won.
No doubt about it. And that's what we're seeing throughout the country. Let me ask you this, because Republican voters want to know who their guy or gal is that's going to be able to beat Hillary Clinton. Let's face it, Hillary Clinton was the First Lady of the United States. She was the senator from New York. She was the Secretary of State. How are you going to convince voters that you've got the experience and the know-how to beat Hillary Clinton?
Well, one, I'm not afraid to take her down. I've been talking about her failure to provide adequate security in Benghazi for a year or two, and I think it has damaged her. She did something that I think is inexcusable by not providing adequate security. The other thing is that when you poll me against Hillary Clinton in 5 states won by President Obama, I lead her. And the reason is I'm able to attract independents. I believe in a rational foreign policy that doesn't have us always at war. In fact, I think Hillary Clinton is more likely to take us back to war in the Middle East than I am. And I think that will attract a lot of independents. I don't want the government collecting all of our phone records. Hillary Clinton supported the surveillance of all Americans, and that attracts a lot of young people and independents. So I think we can beat them on the margins with independents and young people, and I think I'm the worst threat. In fact, I think that's why, even though I'm not doing so well in the polls right now, I've gotten more attacks from the National Democratic Party than any other candidate.
Senator, congratulations on the book, Our Presidents and Their Prayers. I don't know how you had the time to write the book in the middle of campaigning.
My wife helps me quite a bit. She's a great writer as well and has her own book, True and Constant Friends. So together we're sort of a writing team.
Good for you. Senator, good to have you on the program. I'll see you next week in Milwaukee.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.